Every Friday afternoon for 12 straight years, a white unmarked delivery van backed into the gravel lot behind a small welding shop on Route 9 and dropped off another set of blueprints that made no sense. No phone call beforehand, no email, no explanation of what went wrong or why the original fabricators couldn't handle it. Just a manila envelope rubber banded to a stack of warped steel beams, a purchase order with a deadline stamped in red, and a driver who never once learned the welder's name. The woman who ran the company sending those deliveries had never seen the shop, never driven past it, never even looked it up online. To her, it was a line item. Vendor 4471 buried inside a spreadsheet that someone in procurement managed. A cost center, a place where problems went to quietly disappear. But to the man working inside that shop alone, those deliveries were the difference between keeping the lights on and losing everything. His name was Marcus Jennings, and he was 41 years old the first time it occurred to him that he'd spent more than a decade solving another company's problems without ever once hearing the words "thank you." Marcus had the kind of hands that told his entire biography. Earned scars across the left knuckles from a plasma torch accident at 19. A crooked index finger on the right hand, broken during a roof collapse on a job site in his 20s and never properly set because he couldn't afford the specialist. Calluses layered over calluses, permanent black lines in every crease where metal dust had settled so deep no soap could reach it. His hands were 41 going on 60, and they never stopped moving. He stood 6 feet tall but carried himself like a shorter man, shoulders slightly rounded, head tilted forward, the posture of someone accustomed to leaning over workbenches in low-ceilinged rooms. Brown hair cut short because long hair and grinding sparks don't mix. A face that was probably handsome once, before exhaustion carved permanent lines around his eyes and grief added a stillness to his expression that most people mistook for unfriendliness. He wasn't unfriendly. He was just tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. The shop sat 3 miles outside Ridgemont, Ohio, a town of 11,000 people that had been slowly shrinking since the paper mill closed in 2004. The building itself was nothing remarkable. Corrugated metal siding gone rust orange at the seams, a roll-up bay door that stuck halfway, unless you kicked the left track, a hand-painted sign that read, Jennings Metalworks, in letters that had faded from white to the color of old teeth. His father built the shop in 1987. Marcus inherited it in 2011, the same year his father's lungs finally gave out from 40 years of breathing welding fumes without proper ventilation. Inside was a different story. Inside, everything functioned with quiet precision. 2 MIG welders, a TIG setup, an oxyacetylene rig, a hydraulic press, a metal lathe, a drill press, 3 workbenches arranged so Marcus could pivot between stations without wasting a step, every tool hung on a pegboard in its exact outline. Every cable coiled EMIK, every surface wiped down at the end of every day, no matter how late that day ran. The shop was modest, maybe even ugly from the outside, but it was organized the way only a person who truly respects their work keeps a workspace. Marcus could read metal the way some people read faces. He'd run his thumb along a weld seam and know whether the voltage was off by half a setting. He'd hear a beam flex under load and tell you exactly where it would fail and why. He understood metallurgy not from textbooks, though he'd read plenty, but from 22 years of watching what happens when heat meets steel under pressure. The relationship between temperature, time, and structural integrity lived in his nervous system. It was instinct by now. This skill had once earned him a respected position. Before the shop, before Ridgemont became the only world he knew, Marcus spent 7 years as a senior structural fabrication specialist at Pinnacle Development Group, one of the largest commercial construction firms in the Midwest. Pinnacle built shopping centers, office towers, parking structures, hospital wings, anything big enough to require custom steel fabrication. Marcus worked in their manufacturing division, designing and building the skeletal frameworks that held those buildings together. He was good at it, better than good. He had an unusual ability to look at an architect's rendering and immediately identify where the structural engineering would create fabrication problems downstream. He caught design conflicts before they became field failures. He saved Pinnacle millions in rework costs over those 7 years, though nobody ever calculated that number because preventing problems is invisible work. People notice when a building collapses. Nobody notices when it doesn't. The woman running Pinnacle during most of that period was Diane Prescott. Diane was 53 now, though she'd looked roughly the same age. Polished, sharp, carefully maintained since her early 40s. Silver blonde hair always pulled back. Tailored blazers in dark colors, reading glasses she wore on a chain but never seemed to actually use, as if they were more accessory than necessity. She had the particular confidence of someone who had climbed from project coordinator to CEO in 16 years by being smarter, more strategic, and considerably more ruthless than the people around her. Under Diane's leadership, Pinnacle grew aggressively. New regional offices, government contracts, a reputation for delivering projects on time and under budget. Industry publications profiled her. She spoke at conferences about operational efficiency. She sat on 3 corporate boards. She was, by every measurable standard, a success. But growth at Pinnacle had come at a cost that didn't show up in quarterly earnings reports. To hit those budget targets and those timelines, Diane had systematically stripped the company's internal capabilities down to the minimum viable level. She outsourced fabrication, cut quality control staff, replaced senior tradespeople with cheaper subcontractors, and consolidated engineering teams until the people remaining were stretched so thin they stopped catching mistakes. The company looked lean and profitable from the outside. Internally, it was held together with overtime, fear, and the institutional knowledge of a shrinking number of people who still remembered how things were supposed to be done. Marcus was one of the people Pinnacle let go during the 3rd round of workforce optimization 9 years ago. The letter called it a strategic realignment. Marcus called it what it was. They fired the people who actually knew how to build things and kept the people who knew how to manage spreadsheets. The timing was catastrophic. 6 months before losing his job, Marcus's wife, Andrea, had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. She was 34. Their daughter, Ren, had just turned 2. What followed was the worst 18 months of Marcus's life, and he did not talk about it. Not with friends, not with the few remaining family members, not with anyone. Andrea fought hard and died anyway, 11 months after diagnosis in a hospital bed that insurance covered only partially, leaving Marcus with a 2.5-year-old daughter, $74,000 in medical debt, no job, and a grief so heavy he sometimes forgot to breathe. He went back to his father's shop because there was nowhere else to go. The first year, he barely functioned. He welded whatever local jobs came through, trailer hitches, farm gate repairs, a decorative railing for the bank downtown, and spent every other minute trying to figure out how to be a single parent to a toddler who kept asking where Mama went. His mother June drove down from Akron 3 days a week to watch Ren while Marcus worked. Without her, he would not have survived that period. He knew it then, and he knew it now. Slowly, things stabilized. Not improved. Stabilized. Not improved. Stabilized. Marcus got a routine going. Wake at 5. Work until 7. Get Ren dressed and fed. Drop her at daycare, later preschool, later elementary school. Work until pickup time. Homework, dinner, bath, bedtime stories, then back to the shop until midnight if there was a job waiting. Sleep 4 or 5 hours. Repeat. He didn't date, he didn't socialize. He didn't take a vacation or a sick day or a Saturday off for years. He was a machine built for 2 purposes: keeping his daughter safe and keeping the bills paid. Everything else was unnecessary. Then, in his 2nd year on his own, the Friday deliveries started. Pinnacle had quietly been outsourcing its most problematic fabrication jobs, the ones internal teams couldn't handle, the ones subcontractors refused, the ones that required someone who genuinely understood structural steel at a molecular level, to small independent shops. Marcus's shop ended up on the vendor list almost by accident. A procurement manager named Harold Keene remembered Marcus from his Pinnacle days and suggested his shop for a particularly difficult beam modification that had stumped 2 other contractors. Marcus completed the job in 3 days. It should have taken 2 weeks. The repair was structurally flawless. Harold sent another job the following Friday. Then another. Then it became a standing arrangement, and eventually Harold retired and the arrangement continued under the next procurement manager, who never knew Marcus had once worked for Pinnacle, who never knew anything about him at all except that vendor 4471 had a 100% completion rate and never missed a deadline. For 12 years the deliveries came. Every Friday. Sometimes straightforward repairs, often nightmarishly complex fabrication problems that arrived with incomplete drawings, conflicting specifications, and impossible timelines. Marcus solved them all. He reverse-engineered botched welds. He redesigned connection plates that violated load-bearing principles. He corrected mistakes made by Pinnacle's underpaid, undertrained fabrication subcontractors who clearly didn't understand the structural implications of what they were building. Several times, Marcus identified safety-critical failures in steel components that were headed for active construction sites. He flagged them on the work orders. He never knew if anyone read those notes. He flagged them anyway because the alternative, knowing a building might hurt someone and saying nothing, was not something he could live with. In 12 years, Pinnacle paid Marcus's shop approximately $1.2 million in fabrication fees. That sounds like a lot until you calculate materials, overhead, equipment maintenance, insurance, and the fact that Marcus was the sole employee doing work that Pinnacle's internal teams once needed 12 people to handle. His actual take-home, after expenses, averaged around $41,000 a year. It was enough. Barely. He kept the mortgage current. He kept Ren in decent shoes. He put $50 a month into a savings account he privately called the Ren Fund, hoping it might someday help with college. He fixed the truck himself when it broke down. He cut his own hair. He bought groceries on Wednesdays because that's when the IGA ran its weekly specials. Ren was 13 now, and she was the kind of kid who made teachers send home notes that said things like, "A pleasure to have in class," and shows unusual empathy for her peers. She had Andrea's dark eyes and Andrea's habit of tilting her head slightly when she was thinking hard about something. She did her homework at the same desk Marcus's father had used for invoices, a battered metal thing pushed against the shop wall near the space heater, with a lamp she'd decorated with stickers when she was 9 that Marcus would never remove. Ren knew her father worked hard. She didn't fully understand what he did, but she understood the rhythm of it. She understood that Fridays meant a delivery, and that deliveries meant her dad would be in the shop late. She understood that the calloused hands that braided her hair every morning were the same hands that bent steel into shapes other people couldn't. She was proud of him in the quiet, fierce way children are proud of parents who never ask for recognition. She also worried about him, though she tried not to show it. She noticed that he fell asleep on the couch most nights before 10. She noticed that his cough had gotten worse in winter. She noticed that he never bought anything for himself. She was 13 and already carrying the low-grade anxiety of a child who understands, on some level, that the margin between okay and not okay is thinner than adults want to admit. This was their life when everything changed. It started not with a dramatic event, but with an absence. On a Friday in late October, the white delivery van didn't come. Marcus noticed by noon. He'd cleared his morning schedule to make room for the Pinnacle job, as he always did. By 2 o'clock, he called the procurement number on file. Voicemail. He left a message. No callback. The following Friday, same thing. No van, no call, no email, nothing. Marcus felt something he didn't expect, not relief but unease. 12 years of rhythm suddenly interrupted. He checked the news. Nothing about Pinnacle. He checked their website, still operational. He drove past their regional office 20 miles away, lights on, cars in the lot. But a strange quiet, the way a building feels when the people inside are holding their breath. 3 weeks later, he understood why. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. A parking structure Pinnacle had built in Columbus 18 months earlier developed visible cracking in its main support beams. Structural engineers, inspecting the damage, found fabrication defects throughout. Substandard welds, incorrect steel grades, connection points that didn't match the engineering specifications. The structure was evacuated and condemned. 400 cars trapped inside, a shopping center attached to it forced to close. Photographs showed concrete spalling off columns, exposed rebar, steel plates visibly bowing under loads they were never designed to carry. Within a week, investigators identified similar problems at 2 other Pinnacle projects, then a third, then a fourth. The pattern was clear and damning. For years, Pinnacle had been using cut-rate fabrication subcontractors who lacked the expertise to handle the structural work they were assigned. Quality control, gutted by cost cuts, had failed to catch errors that any competent inspector would have flagged. The company had prioritized speed and margin over structural integrity, and the buildings were starting to show it. Marcus read the reports with a feeling he could only describe as sick recognition. He'd seen those exact problems in the components Pinnacle sent him every Friday. The bad welds, the wrong steel grades, the connection details that ignored basic engineering principles. He'd been fixing those problems, one delivery at a time, one beam at a time, for over a decade. He'd been a bandage on a wound that nobody wanted to admit existed. Now the wound was open, and it was enormous. Pinnacle's stock dropped 40% in 2 weeks. 3 board members resigned. The head of engineering was fired. Lawsuits mounted. From building owners, from tenants, from municipal authorities. OSHA launched an investigation. The company's bonding capacity was frozen, which meant no new projects, which meant no revenue, which meant layoffs started almost immediately. Diane Prescott held a press conference promising full transparency and corrective action. She looked for the first time in public memory like a person who hadn't slept. Marcus watched the press conference from his shop. Ren was at school. The space heater hummed. Outside, the gravel lot sat empty where the white van usually parked. He turned off the television and went back to a handrail repair for a church in Zanesville. He expected nothing. 6 weeks after the parking structure collapse on a cold Monday morning in December, a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot outside Jennings Metalworks. Marcus was inside, grinding a weld on a stair stringer. He didn't hear the car. He heard the knock on the bay door frame. 3 sharp raps, the knock of someone accustomed to doors being open for them. He killed the grinder, lifted his welding hood, and saw Diane Prescott standing in his doorway. She wore a dark wool coat. No briefcase. No assistant. No clipboard. She looked smaller than she did on television. Her face had the particular tightness of someone who had been clenching their jaw for weeks and had forgotten how to stop. Marcus recognized her immediately. He'd never met her personally, but in the welding and fabrication world, Diane Prescott's face was everywhere. Conferences, trade magazines, that Forbes profiled 3 years ago with the headline "A Woman Building America's Malls." There was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds but felt significantly longer. The CEO of a company worth $500 million standing in a shop that smelled like cutting oil and burnt flux, looking at the man whose work she'd relied on for 12 years without ever knowing his name. "You're Marcus Jennings," she said. "Not a question." "I am. I'm Diane Prescott, Pinnacle Development." "I know who you are." Another silence. Diane looked around the shop. She saw the pegboard tools, the swept floor, the metal desk where Wren's stickers caught the fluorescent light. She saw the small microwave on a shelf next to a box of instant oatmeal. She saw a child's drawing taped to the wall, a crayon house with an oversized sun and the words "Dad's Work" written in careful, uneven letters. "Can I have 10 minutes?" she asked. "You can have 5. He didn't say it to be rude. He said it because he had a stair stringer due by Thursday, and time was money in a way that people who'd never been poor didn't fully understand. Diane sat on a metal stool near the workbench. She didn't ease into it. She sat the way you sit in a doctor's office when you already know the news is bad. She told him everything. Not the press conference version. Not the board-approved messaging. The real version. 23 buildings under review. 11 with confirmed structural deficiencies. Estimated remediation costs north of $200 million. Insurance covering a fraction. Lawsuits multiplying weekly. 3 criminal referrals to the state attorney general's office. 2,000 employees facing layoffs. Subcontractors owed money. Pinnacle couldn't pay. And the core technical problem. Pinnacle no longer had the internal expertise to assess which buildings were actually dangerous and which were merely deficient. They'd outsourced and downsized so aggressively that the people who understood structural fabrication at a detailed level were gone. The few remaining engineers were generalists, project managers who could read drawings but couldn't evaluate weld integrity or assess whether a column connection would hold under dynamic loads. They needed someone who could walk onto a site, look at a steel frame, and actually know from experience and instinct and thousands of hours of hands-on work whether it was safe. Your repair records are the most detailed documentation we have for hundreds of components across dozens of projects, Diane said. Your notes on the work orders, the ones about load-bearing failures, incorrect steel grades, connection deficiencies, those notes are more thorough than anything our internal quality team produced in the last 5 years. She paused. "I should have known your name a long time ago." Marcus didn't respond to that. He was thinking about something else. "How many of those buildings have people inside them right now?" he asked. 14. 14 buildings with potential structural problems and people walking around inside them. Yes? Marcus looked at the crayon drawing on the wall. Dad's work. Then he looked at his hands. Then back at Diane. "I'm not doing this for Pinnacle," he said. Diane blinked. "Those are families in those buildings, people shopping with their kids, people working desk jobs and assuming the ceiling isn't going to come down on them. That's who I'd be doing this for." "I understand. I'm not sure you do, but I'll help anyway." He laid out conditions that Diane, even 6 months earlier, would have dismissed as absurd from someone running a one-man shop in rural Ohio. Full technical authority on all structural assessments, no interference from legal, from PR, for project managers trying to minimize findings for liability reasons. If he said a building was unsafe, it got evacuated. No debate. No cost-benefit analysis. No let's wait for a second opinion. He needed a schedule that worked around his daughter's life. He could be on site Monday through Thursday. Fridays he picked Ren up from school. Weekends were hers, non-negotiable. He needed honest data. Every set of original engineering drawings, every fabrication order, every inspection report, every change order. No redactions, no that file is with legal. Everything. And he needed Pinnacle to hire back at least 4 of the senior fabrication specialists they'd laid off over the past decade. He had names. People he'd worked alongside years ago who were now scattered across other companies, other states, other careers. People who knew what they were doing. "You cut the people who actually build things," Marcus told her. "You kept the people who make PowerPoints about building things. That's why you're here." Diane didn't argue. She couldn't. She agreed to every condition. Over the following 3 months, Marcus systematically assessed every building Pinnacle had constructed in the past 8 years. He drove to Columbus, to Cincinnati, to Indianapolis, to Louisville. He crawled through parking garages with a flashlight and an ultrasonic thickness gauge. He climbed scaffolding in half-finished structures and ran his hands along column welds the way a doctor palpates for something wrong beneath the surface. He found problems everywhere. Not all of them were critical. Some were cosmetic, ugly welds that were structurally adequate. Some were moderate, connections that needed reinforcement but weren't in immediate danger. But 7 buildings had deficiencies serious enough that Marcus ordered work stoppages or occupancy restrictions on the spot. 2 of those required emergency shoring, temporary steel supports installed within hours to prevent potential collapse. One of those 2 buildings was a medical office complex in Dayton. 3 floors. 47 employees working inside when Marcus arrived. He spent 4 hours inspecting the basement-level columns, growing quieter with each measurement. The welds connecting the main support columns to the foundation plates were catastrophically inadequate, not just bad workmanship. Wrong process entirely. Someone had used a procedure rated for light structural work on connections carrying the full gravity load of a 3-story building. Marcus called the building manager from the parking lot. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. "You need to get everyone out of that building today. Not tomorrow. Today." "Can you tell me why?" "Because the columns holding up the first floor are relying on welds that shouldn't be holding up a garden shed." "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being accurate. Get them out." They were out by 4 o'clock that afternoon. Marcus stayed until midnight supervising the emergency shoring installation. He called Ren from the site at 7 to say goodnight and apologize for not being home. She said it was okay. He could hear in her voice that she meant it, and also that she was worried. "Dad, are you fixing something important?" "Yeah, sweetheart, I am." "Is it dangerous?" "Not anymore." He stayed at a motel that night. The sheets smelled like industrial detergent. He lay in the dark thinking about the 47 people who had been working in that building, completely unaware that the floor beneath their feet was held together by welds a first-year apprentice would have failed. He thought about how close it had been. Not days close, not weeks. The kind of close that structural engineers describe in testimony with phrases like, "significant remaining margin was uncertain." He thought about Andrea, about what she'd say if she could see him now. She'd probably say something practical and kind at the same time, the way she always did, something like, "You did the right thing today, but please eat something and go to sleep." He ate a granola bar from the gas station next door and eventually slept. During this period, Diane observed Marcus closely. Not just his technical work, though that alone was remarkable, a level of hands-on expertise that her remaining engineering staff openly admitted they couldn't match, but his character. She watched him teach younger engineers on site without condescension. He'd hand someone a weld gauge and say, "Tell me what you see," and then patiently walk them through the indicators, the grain structure, the discoloration patterns that revealed process errors. He never made anyone feel stupid for not knowing. He made them feel like knowing was possible. She watched him handle contractors and building managers with a directness that was occasionally blunt but never dishonest. He didn't soften findings to avoid confrontation. He didn't exaggerate them for drama. He said what he found, explained what it meant, and recommended what to do about it. People trusted him almost immediately because they could tell he had no agenda beyond getting it right. She watched him on the phone with Ren every evening, his entire demeanor shifting, shoulders dropping, voice softening, a patience in his tone that seemed to come from somewhere bottomless. He talked her through a math problem while simultaneously reviewing engineering drawings, somehow fully present in both conversations. On Fridays he left every job site by 2 o'clock regardless of what was happening because he told his daughter he'd be there, and that was that. One evening in February, Diane found Marcus in a Pinnacle conference room after hours, surrounded by structural drawings, eating cold pizza from a box that someone's assistant had ordered for a meeting he wasn't invited to. She sat down across from him. "I owe you an apology," she said. Marcus looked up from the drawings. "For which part?" "For 12 years of treating you like a line item." He considered this for a moment. "I wasn't looking for an apology." "I know. That's partly why you deserve one." She told him something she hadn't told anyone else, that the parking structure failure was the first time in her career she'd felt genuine fear. Not fear of lawsuits or financial loss or professional embarrassment. Fear that her decisions might have actually hurt people, that her relentless optimization, her celebrated efficiency, her award-winning cost management had gradually hollowed out the thing that was supposed to matter most, whether the buildings her company put up would stand. "I built a machine for making money," she said. "Somewhere along the way, I forgot it was supposed to also be a machine for making buildings that keep people safe." Marcus didn't tell her it was okay because it wasn't, but he didn't pile on either. "You know what's interesting?" he said. "Every one of those Friday deliveries you sent me, every welded beam, every connection plate, every bracket, I could see the company changing through the work. Year 1, the stuff that came in was mostly normal rework. Tight tolerances, minor corrections. Routine. By year 5 I was seeing real problems. Wrong materials, bad joint prep, designs that didn't account for thermal expansion. By year 8, I was basically rebuilding components from scratch because what arrived was so far from spec it was faster to start over than to fix it." He tapped a drawing on the table. "I watched her company get worse one Friday at a time. And I kept fixing it because the check cleared and my kid needed shoes." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Diane in years. She sat with it for a long time. The remediation took 5 months total. Marcus assessed all 23 buildings, prioritized repairs, designed structural reinforcement solutions, and supervised the most critical installations personally. The 4 senior fabricators he'd insisted Pinnacle rehire: Mike Callahan from Akron, Rosa Delgado from Toledo, James O'Coffer from Detroit, and Peggy Strauss from Youngstown, formed the core of a rapid response team that executed repairs across 3 states. The work was unglamorous and exhausting, crawling through ceiling planums, working in occupied buildings during off hours to minimize disruption, grinding and re-welding connections at 2 in the morning because the medical office needed to reopen at 7, writing reports that were simultaneously technical enough for engineers and clear enough for judges. Marcus lost 12 pounds he didn't have to lose and developed a persistent pain in his right shoulder from overhead welding that he treated with ibuprofen and ignored. But the buildings held, every one of them. Pinnacle survived, not gracefully. 3 more board members departed. The company paid $43 million in settlements, and Diane personally absorbed a level of professional criticism that would have destroyed someone less resilient. But the company survived. More importantly, no one was hurt. Not a single occupant injury, not one collapse. The buildings Marcus assessed and repaired stood exactly as he said they would, and the buildings he flagged for evacuation were reinforced in time. The structural engineering firm hired by the plaintiff's attorneys to evaluate Marcus's work described his assessments as exceptionally thorough, technically precise, and almost certainly preventative of serious structural failure. That sentence appeared in court documents that Marcus never read because he was back in Ridgemont by then, refinishing a set of wrought iron gates for a cemetery in Newark. Diane offered him a position, not just any position. Vice President of Structural Integrity, a role that hadn't existed before and that she created specifically for him. Corner office. 6-figure salary. A team of 12 reporting to him. Benefits, retirement plan, the works. Marcus considered it for 4 days. He talked to Ren about it because he'd learned that 13-year-olds have opinions worth hearing. Would we have to move? Ren asked. Maybe. They'd want me in Columbus most of the time. What about the shop? I'd probably have to close it, or sell it. Ren looked at the pegboard tools, the swept concrete floor, the stool where she'd done homework since she was old enough to hold a pencil. She looked at the drawing she'd made when she was 7, the crayon house with the oversized sun, still taped to the wall with yellowing Scotch tape. Dad, do you want to work for them? I want to do work that matters. You already do. He took the job. But not the way Diane expected. Marcus negotiated a consulting arrangement instead of a full-time position. 3 days a week on-site for Pinnacle, structured around Ren's school schedule. He kept the shop open for local work. He kept living in Ridgemont. He refused to relocate, refused the corner office, refused the title. He accepted the authority, final say on all structural fabrication standards, veto power over any subcontractor, mandatory quality reviews at every stage of construction. But not the trappings. I don't need a parking space with my name on it, he told Diane. I need your engineers to know the difference between a full penetration weld and a fillet weld. Start there. She started there. Months passed. Pinnacle changed, not overnight, and not without resistance from project managers who resented being told that their timelines needed to accommodate proper inspection protocols. But slowly, measurably, the quality of work improved. Marcus established training programs. He brought fabrication back in-house where it mattered most. He created a quality documentation system based on the same meticulous work order notes he'd been writing for 12 years in his shop. Notes that nobody at Pinnacle had ever read until it was almost too late. Friday deliveries stopped, obviously. The white van had no reason to come anymore. Instead, something else happened on Fridays. Diane started visiting the shop. Not for business. She drove the 90 minutes from Columbus to Ridgemont, brought coffee from a place in Granville, and sat on the metal stool near the workbench while Marcus worked on local jobs and Ren did homework at the desk. They talked, not about structural engineering or corporate liability or board meetings. About other things. About how Diane had 2 grown sons she barely knew because she'd spent their childhoods in conference rooms. About how Marcus still kept Andrea's reading glasses in the kitchen drawer even though it had been 11 years. About what it means to build something, a company, a family, a life, and how easy it is to get so focused on the structure that you forget about the foundation. One Friday in late spring, Ren looked up from her geometry homework and said, "Miss Prescott, did you know my dad can tell what's wrong with a piece of metal just by listening to it?" Diane smiled. "I'm starting to understand that your dad can do quite a few things I didn't give him credit for." Ren nodded seriously. "He can also make really good grilled cheese, but only if you don't rush him." Marcus laughed. It was a sound Ren hadn't heard enough of in her 13 years, and she stored it away carefully, the way you save things you hope to hear again. A year later, an industry publication ran a profile on Pinnacle's turnaround. The article credited new leadership approaches, improved safety culture, and enhanced quality protocols. Diane was quoted extensively. Marcus was mentioned in one paragraph near the end as an independent structural consultant who played a key role in the company's remediation efforts. He didn't mind. He'd never done any of it for the paragraph. He did it because 47 people were working in a building held up by bad welds, and someone needed to say so. He did it because 14 buildings full of ordinary people deserved to stand. He did it because his daughter was watching and he wanted her to understand that doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing are sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. And when they're not, you choose the right thing. Every time. Even when it's inconvenient. Even when nobody notices. Even when the company that once fired you comes back 12 years later and needs the skills they threw away. Especially then. Some Friday evenings after Diane had driven back to Columbus and Ren had finished her homework and the shop was quiet except for the ticking of cooling metal, Marcus stood in the doorway and looked out at the gravel lot. Empty now. No white van. No manila envelopes. No purchase order stamped in red. Just a small building on a neglected road kept clean by a man who understood that the work matters even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Ren appeared beside him sometimes during these moments, leaning against the doorframe, smelling faintly of pencil shavings and the strawberry shampoo she'd started buying with her own babysitting money. "What are you looking at, Dad?" "Nothing really, just checking." "Checking what?" They were still here, they always were. Sometimes the person holding up the building has been standing in the basement all along, doing the work nobody sees, carrying a weight nobody measures, showing up every single day not because anyone asked but because the work needs doing, and they are the kind of person who does it. And sometimes, not always but sometimes, the rest of the world finally looks down and realizes the foundation was a person.